Hi, it's Mike here. Just wanted to let you know that there's something with this video that went wrong about halfway through, maybe around the 25-minute mark. We noticed while we were editing, it started to get glitchy. The audio didn't really line up correctly with the video. We're not really sure what happened, but we are taking steps to address it. So in the upcoming videos, it's not going to be an issue. But suffice to say, it is on this one. We don't have time to re-record everything, and we thought the conversation was important and valuable as we talk about mental health and the intersection of spiritual and emotional health and how all of this works together to address how we become whole people, not just segmented people who kind of go, well, if my spiritual life is right, then my mental health will follow. But to recognize that there is an integrated aspect of who we are. So we think this is an important topic, an important discussion to have, and we hope that it's helpful for you. Just so you know, though, about the 25-minute mark, there's just going to be a still image that's in there. You can still hear it. The audio is fine. And if you'd prefer to listen to it as a podcast, we will also have that link in the description of the video here. And you can also find it wherever you listen to podcasts, however you get podcasts. So all that being said, hope you enjoy it. Hope it's helpful. Hope you find some benefit in this. And we will see you next week. Welcome back to Rough Cut Faith, everyone.
Howdy.
If you are joining us for the first time, thanks for being here.
Yeah.
If you are returning, hey, thanks.
Wow.
Awesome. Why? Why did you do that?
Why would you do that? I don't understand.
I'm grateful for it,
Yeah.
but why?
Good stuff.
So this is a new opportunity for us to engage in some ways that the world processes things, how we can look at the world through the eyes of faith, and how we learn to see things from God's perspective a little bit differently than maybe we did when we sat down here.
That was way more. That was an impressive grinding the gears of thought to get to where you were going.
Yeah.
I was just like. At first, I was like, "Did you want to start?" And then I was like, "No, I'm just going to watch him roll with this." This is impressive.
That's I don't have a plan until we start, and then it's like the plan just comes together.
So glad we're talking about biochemistry today.
Yeah. You can see how smoothly we transition to things.
Man.
Yeah. So we're talking about mental health today. Is one of the things, one of the main topics that we want to address.
Sure.
Because in the church, it has felt like for a very long time, the concept or the topic of mental health has kind of gotten pushed aside. It's gotten, it's something that people kind of say, well, we don't need to talk about that. Or it's something that is given a different context.
Sure.
Just recently, I don't know if you heard John MacArthur's statements, and we're not going to go into the whole thing critiquing his statements. There's other people who have done that. But for those of you who may not know and may not be familiar with John MacArthur, that's perfectly fine if you're not.
Yeah.
He made some statements recently that some recognized mental health issues are not real. That PTSD isn't real, OCD isn't real, ADHD, and that medication is demonic, and that it is something that leads people.
The noble lie. I think
a
is the way he
noble lie.
referred to it.
Yeah.
Which is weird because I don't normally keep my it's weird. I think there's a handful of pastors that I really admire, and they're very aware of what's going on in the world of Christianity and everything, and I tend to be more just like very not aware of it. Because I tend to be just focused on what's happening in our community, what's happening in our church. That tends to be where that's my focus. So I'm not really concerned about what's happening in other areas. And even I heard about this one.
Yeah.
I was like, wow, that's a very interesting thought. Now,
my first thought was I didn't realize MacArthur was still speaking.
Yeah.
That's how long it's been since I've heard anything from him.
Yeah. Yeah, it's weird. So when I went to Bible school, the school that I attended, they liked MacArthur for his counseling philosophy, but not necessarily his theology. But that is one of the two camps that you will see when you were talking about. It seems like it was neglected for a long
Yeah,
time
yeah.
regarding mental health. There were two camps that I was exposed to. Growing up, I didn't think anything of it. It just was, somebody's going to see a counselor, somebody's
Yeah,
on medication for something, somebody's having a rough time. Okay, I get it. Heard all of those things. I went to a Bible college that really leaned into those types of philosophies of counseling were wrong, and everything was a sin issue or a heart issue.
Yeah,
Which
yeah.
is where I think MacArthur leans in his approach to counseling, and so
Yeah.
I think it's even if he uh, even if he has some things that are helpful, his perspective there I think is really unhelpful.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that was the question I was thinking of first.
Sure.
Was why do you think it has been ignored? Why the church has a history
Sure.
of
Definitely strands of it.
Yeah, a poor view, a poor response to
Sure.
mental health. Why do you think that is?
I probably would say it goes back to some of, at least my gut would be that it probably goes back to some of the origins in and around the mental health field as a whole. So Freud, Skinner, some of those guys, some of their philosophy was very
yeah.
antagonistic towards Christianity and faith, and so it kind of became this false dichotomy
Yeah,
of,
yeah.
oh, well, if you love the Bible, then you can't, this guy's like totally a pervert.
Yeah,
So, and he hates God and he hates this, and so don't take anything he says.
Yeah, yeah.
And to be, I think to be fair, you have to acknowledge that was a pretty new field
Yeah.
that they were looking at, and they were trying to make sense of it. And so, like in an instance, like a guy like a Freud, he was doing it out of a framework of understanding who God was,
Yeah,
or
yeah, yeah.
or at least he was looking for means to describe what was going on outside of that. And so the world he created, even a lot of mental health professionals would go, okay, he was onto something, but his conclusions for the origins of some of those things
Yeah.
weren't exactly right. And
Yeah, he's kind of seen as the great grandfather
Sure.
of counseling,
Yeah,
of psychology.
yeah.
But
it's like he's using leeches,
Yeah,
kind of like
right, right.
we don't look at
Yeah.
medical professionals from a surgery standpoint and go, oh, we got to go back to
Yeah.
the 1700s
Yeah.
to really get back to good medicine.
he started something off, and
Yeah.
I think Carl Jung then kind of he was a student of Freud, and then they had a
Yeah.
falling out. They disagreed pretty dramatically,
Sure.
but that was both of those laid a framework for counseling or for psychology that was outside of a biblical framework. And so it makes sense then why the church is always afraid of what's coming.
Yeah.
And so to see this new field that seemed to dabble in the metaphysical,
Sure.
which had always kind of been the realm of the church. There's the spiritual and there's the physical, and we don't really mix the two. So if you want to be a doctor or a surgeon, that's fine. That's the physical.
You can see those wounds.
Those are-
you can
yeah.
see those issues.
Yep.
Whereas mental health wise,
It's
psychology
intangible.
wise, it's like you may see behaviors, but you don't necessarily see what they're trying to treat,
Yeah.
per se.
Yeah, so it seems then that the church has always seen issues as like, well, it's a sin issue. I mean, that was, we'll fast forward a bit from
Sure.
Freud's and Jung and
Sure.
and Skinner, and like move up to today. When we were growing up, it was, I know in the church kind of had this view of, well, if you're depressed, the joy of the Lord should be your strength, and therefore you must have sin in your life
Yes.
because you are depressed.
Yeah.
And that was the big one. Now there's a myriad of other issues, but I'm just going to camp on depression a little bit because that was the one that I had more experience with, and seeing that in my own family. But that seemed to be the general consensus of the church was if there is sin in your life, then you will feel depressed or you will feel anxious or you will feel afraid, and
Yeah.
you will, if we get rid of the sin.
Which, if we're gonna be like, attempt to have nuance in this and understanding, right? There is shame and guilt that at times Scripture describes as being tied to sin and offense to God.
Yeah, yeah.
But we're talking about something different than that.
Yeah, well, I wanted to talk about what is the difference. Like, where are those lines? And they're very blurry.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it comes down, and this is the hard part, right? It does come down to each individual, and it comes down to their own health. And this is the weird thing. We're not professional counselors. We're pastors.
Yeah.
We provide pastoral counseling. We provide spiritual direction. But both of us will refer people out to
Yeah.
professional counselors when we come up against something that we go, okay, this is beyond just. This is beyond a spiritual issue.
Yeah,
There's
yeah.
something outside of that. And I think the distinction that in some of those pastoral camps is they wouldn't make that distinction.
Yeah,
They wouldn't
yeah.
look at it and say, okay, this is not just spiritual, or this is just deep-rooted spiritual. This is, rather than looking at potentially some kind of biological cause. At either a brain level or a past trauma and
Yeah,
that reprocessing of things. And so I don't look at psychology or counseling or therapy as an either or to pastoral counseling or to our spiritual life,
Yeah.
but as a potential tool for those that could benefit from it.
Yeah, yeah.
Not everybody needs to go that route. Some do. And some could take it or leave it. And I think the challenge for us is trying to be discerning enough to go, okay, is there guilt over sin in this, right? And is that sin real, or is there a perception of sin that's
Yeah.
not real?
Yeah.
And you're dealing with guilt that is overwhelming with that, like, and depression around that. Is it rooted in something tangible that you can put your finger on and say, okay, this is a decision of really horrible things I'm continually doing, and I feel this type
Yeah,
of depression and remorse about this? Or is it just, I'm just a bad person, I can't do anything right? And then, okay, well, what makes you think that? Well, if it turns into that kind of a thing where it's just who I am.
Yeah.
Okay, well, let's okay, maybe explain that a little more. It becomes much more of a, because if somebody says I'm just a bad person, I could look at that from a pastoral perspective and go, what's your theological camp? What did you grow up with? What's your view of sin and human nature and forgiveness in Christ? What's your view of those things? Because
Yeah.
a lot of really good people that just lean heavily on depravity and that piece of sin. And so it's like, okay, well, if that's something that people grew up with, that's in many ways, that's a pastoral counseling role. Whereas if somebody didn't grow up in that and they're just, in many ways, I'll say, their life is completely altered by the emotional sense of overwhelming depression or shame or guilt, then at that point, usually what I want to do is try to bring in additional support in case something else is going on.
Because we see that we see a fuzzy line,
Sure.
a blurry line between our spiritual health and our emotional health.
Yeah.
And I would even say like mental health and emotional health could be two sides of the same coin, maybe,
Sure.
but they're different issues.
Yes.
Where where mental health could be a biochemical, a physiological
Sure.
issue with the brain.
Sure.
And emotional health tends to come and I don't even know if this is clinical, like this is certainly not clinical, like you said.
Okay.
We're pastors, we're not therapists.
Sure.
As I engage with people over the last 15 to 20 years in
Yeah.
engaging in community and trying to help people walk through various things in their life, I've noticed that there is a biochemical nature where there is a portion of someone's brain that actually there's issues that need to be dealt with there from a physiological standpoint.
Sure.
And then the emotional health is there are traumatic events that happen in a person's life that shift how they respond emotionally, and there's a lack of impulse control perhaps, or it's the thing that affects personality. It's the things that, so there's like a more intangible nature to that
Sure.
that has to do with how we've engaged and interacted with the world around us that affects us deeply.
Yeah.
That may not necessarily be physiological in origin,
Yeah.
but could become physiological.
Yeah.
So with these distinctions, there's also the spiritual aspect to it that an imbalance does affect how we engage with the world around us, and it affects how we engage with our spiritual life then. Particularly how it affects how we engage with a community of faith.
Yeah.
It affects how we
Relationships.
the relationships we have, how we view God.
Yeah.
Based on a traumatic experience in childhood can affect how you view God.
Yeah.
And I'm simplifying it for
Sure.
the purpose of discussion here. So if something happens early in childhood that affects us deeply, that affects our emotional health, has physiological responses to that event, that then shapes how we view God. And so you get to be a 35, 45-year-old adult, you're engaging in church, you continue to have these, this view of God that was shaped by something that happened 30 years ago. That becomes a multi-fronted or multifaceted issue.
And sometimes your view of God can change at a head level, but there's still an emotional response that you can't
Yeah.
wrap your brain around.
Right.
And you're still acting like you have a different view of who God is. And that's, I think that is part of why it's such a complicated situation.
Yeah.
And, you know, and there have been streams of Christianity that didn't get caught up in the were opposed to it, you know, and some that did. And I've kind of, and I think you've probably had this as well, but I've had a front row seat to watch people that would embrace something called nouthetic counseling, which is a Bible-based, everything can be addressed at a sin or a heart level.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's hard because there's, in many ways, there's biblical truth that they're trying to help people address. But I think the statement that was so controversial from what MacArthur had said recently is that it dismissed any type of other mental health or emotional illness across the board.
Yeah.
It's like it doesn't exist. It's a made-up big pharma fairy tale.
There's no physiological reason for it.
And I think having sat with and observed people that embraced that type of counseling, that then experienced mental health issues for themselves or within families, and watching, I think the perspective caused more harm
Yeah.
because it wasn't addressed for an extended period of time until it had to be.
Yeah.
And that, I think, is the danger of saying that those types of things don't exist or putting everything at a heart or sin level.
Yeah.
The hard part, though, is, again, that nuance of we don't know.
Yeah.
You don't see it. Like if somebody's had an amputation, you can tell that there's something missing.
Yep.
If somebody's got a flesh wound, like if there's a gash in somebody's arm, you can see that, you can address that. If somebody walks in, we'll take maybe like a bipolar, for example, they may come in and just be super happy and cheery and great if they're in a manic phase. And you're like, what a great person.
Yeah,
How
yeah.
how personable, how this, how that.
Yeah.
And then you can watch the flip to the other side and go like, whoa, Jekyll and Hyde. Like, how did that happen?
Yeah,
Right? But unless you're with them for an extended, you don't see that.
Yep. Yep.
And so it's like, but I've had the chance to sit and watch over, like, life and ministry to see, oh, those things are real.
Yeah.
I'll even say, for me, just recently, having been given an ADHD diagnosis, when I heard that because like it doesn't exist, I'm like, oh wow, that's dismissive.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
damaging.
yeah, I think it is. I really do. I think it's unhelpful. Because it's an oversimplified approach to humanity.
Yeah, and I think that's such a good way to say it, because human beings are complex. The individual is a complex system
Sure.
of environmental, of nurture, of genetics. As they grow up,
Yep.
we are experiencing something new every day. The first 10 years of our life is this like barrage of how do I, as a child, you're trying to figure out how do I interact with the world. And when you have traumatic events happen, I love the example of, I don't remember who said it, but if you see a child with a balloon and they let a balloon go and they start crying,
Yeah.
and as an adult, you just go, come on, it's a balloon.
Yeah.
And I heard someone say, what if that was your wallet as an
Yeah.
adult and your wallet or your phone just
Yeah.
floated away and you're
Yeah.
like, ah!
Yeah. No! Yeah.
That's where a child is at. So a child is experiencing traumatic events that adults don't even recognize, that we're just like, we've made it this far,
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
for a 5-year-old who just lost a balloon, that's harsh.
Yeah.
And if you're just there saying, forget it,
Yeah.
I'll get you another one, it's no big deal, then that child sees a parent as less empathetic,
Yeah.
as somebody who doesn't care.
Yeah.
And so they go through life you go through your first 10 years of life with all of these little events that shape who you are.
Yeah.
And that just adds to the complexity of who we are as individuals as we grow up and we process life. And we're coming up with these defense mechanisms to just protect ourselves.
Sure.
But those defenses are dangerous for us, and we didn't realize it because we formed them at 8, and
Yeah.
we didn't know that
Yeah.
at 28 they
Yeah.
were damaging.
Yeah. Yeah.
So to then say, you're in counseling, here are some Bible verses, you need to meditate on these. And if you continue to experience this pattern, it's your sin.
Yeah.
You are the problem, but it's this evil and sin that lives inside you that is
Yeah.
the problem. And that just puts more, to me, that just puts more trauma back onto the victim.
Sure. Yeah. And it's hard because as a pastor, you want people to be meditating on the truths of Scripture. But to make it about the illustration of the balloon going away, I like, because it's like, oh yeah, you can identify with that. But you take it to an extreme and you deal with a child whose parent committed suicide,
Yep.
or somebody who died, or
Experienced abuse, which is
abuse,
rampant.
all of those things, right? How much more so does
Yeah.
that? So
Yep.
when you and I both worked in special ed, and one of the things that, at least at the organization I was with, that we would say was, everybody's got coping mechanisms that are successful.
Yeah.
They may not be appropriate, but they're successful.
Yeah. Yep.
And I latched onto that years ago because I was like, wait, that's so true even for me as an adult.
Yep.
What about for other people in the church that we're ministering to? Everybody's got coping mechanisms.
Yeah. Yeah.
And they're successful for them. They may not like how they feel afterwards. They may, that may churn into more guilt or shame
Yeah.
or whatever. That's learning to identify the coping mechanisms and going like, what's actually not just successful, but what's actually helpful in the long run. Like learning to process those types of things.
Yeah.
And I think, I think it's easy for like our generation and older to not really think about emotional or mental health because it didn't matter.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah,
just like we grew up with, at least my experience growing up was you just push through and get it done.
Yeah.
That's it. You
Yep.
know? Yeah, life is hard, deal with it
Yeah.
and move on.
Yeah.
Right? And so you end up with, and in some ways, yeah, you do. You can't protect yourself from everything, but that doesn't mean that you're not affected by it. And so how do we then lean into, as Christians, not adding to people's shame for what may be something that occurred in their past that they're mentally or emotionally struggling with, that somehow, like, okay, that's great that Jesus forgives my sin,
Yeah.
but I have panic attacks
Yeah.
because I've experienced this.
Right.
Right? So
Yeah.
what is that?
So and it's completely disingenuous and dangerous to tell somebody, oh, you have panic attacks. That's because you don't trust God enough.
Yeah. Or it's guilt
Yeah.
or grief.
Yep.
You're experiencing this. And so, like PTSD, oh, it's just grief that's out of control. You just need to move beyond that grief.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right? It's again, it goes back to that. It's an oversimplification that I think, and as I agree with you, it's dangerous in the long run, unless we begin to learn to be discerning. And I think that's probably one of those things that, if I could pick a theme about Rough Cut, like over the first couple, it's learning to be discerning.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
learning to recognize, like, so I know, I can only talk about really some of the things that I've experienced and
Sure.
observed,
Yep.
but I know the conversation, I always just assumed I was horribly undisciplined. And I had used every strategy that I could. I mean, you've worked with me. You've known how many different approaches to planners
Yeah.
I've had,
Yeah.
and the different things that go on, and how easily I can nail down on and boom, I'm off on this path. But professionally, man, I was so frustrated. Like at this stage of my life in my mid-40s, going, early 40s at the time, where I was really just at a point of I just don't get this.
Yeah.
Like I'd gone through burnout, I'd gone through mild depression over some other situations with family and illness there, and it kind of bounced back and was like, okay, putting the pieces back together. I'm like, I'm more organized than I've ever been. I've got more accountability for getting things done than I've ever had. Why do I feel like I'm constantly grinding the gears?
Yeah.
And the mental and emotional stress that you deal with over that was horrible. Like, I was like, man, it just, it was so discouraging.
Yeah.
And because it had been the course for most of my life, like always pushing to the end of a deadline so that then I could
You have the
focus in.
energy.
Yeah, now I've hit flow.
Yeah,
Now I can crank out a week's worth of work in the next 8 hours. Didn't
Yep.
mean it was good, but it meant
But
I could crank
do
it out,
yeah.
right? And there was no interruption. I was laser focused in that. And then all of a sudden it's like to go, maybe I should talk to my doctor about this, because I don't understand this.
Yeah.
And I think for so many folks our age and older, that wouldn't be a thought that they would necessarily have.
Yeah.
Because that's just a discipline issue. That's just
Right. You just have to push through.
You're just undisciplined.
Yep.
And you need to be more disciplined.
Yeah.
And
So blaming it on
blame
something
it on.
else
It's a
is
character
cop-out.
flaw.
Yeah.
It's a character flaw within yourself.
Yep.
And I know for sitting down with a doc at first, and having that conversation and being like, and they're going, well, you meet all the qualifications for someone with adult ADHD, and I'm like, well, okay, so talk to me some more about
Yeah,
that. Help me sort this out. And so then that began the process of trying to evaluate. Do I look at medication? Do I not? Like in all of those, like it was a back and forth that really has been a couple years of trying to explore.
Yeah.
Like what's going on. And I can tell you at first it was like a burden came off my shoulders because it was 25, 30 years of trying to be a productive member of society, within an organization and going like, there's a reason why I'm struggling with this.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Now, let me
Sure.
cut in there. I think that's what's really very critical for people to recognize, that when you find a reason, it's not an excuse.
Sure. Yeah.
And I think that, like you said, there is a generation that says it's just an excuse. Yeah, you're depressed, still get up, get a shower, go to work.
Yeah.
It's I don't remember. There was a Bob Newhart sketch years ago that
Yeah.
is hilarious, and he was a counselor.
Yeah.
And his answer was, "Stop it."
Yeah,
Like,
just stop it.
Yeah, just stop it.
Just stop it.
Like,
Yeah.
I compulsively steal things. Well, stop it.
Stop it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like telling someone who struggles with anorexia, would just eat more.
Yeah.
Like, that is not the underlying issue.
Yeah.
It's not saying you have an excuse.
Just go on.
Just go on. Just get
Yeah.
past. Stop making excuses. But on the flip side of that, if there is an issue and you don't take the proper steps to deal with it,
Yeah.
then that's irresponsible.
Yeah.
Also.
Yeah.
To say, oh, yes, I have been diagnosed with this. I'm not doing anything about it.
Yeah.
Like, that's also very damaging.
Yeah, and I think that in my experience, the hard part has been like, how with that knowledge, how do I adapt and
Yeah.
adjust life?
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think that would be, I would assume that would be the case for any mental health or emotional thing, is like, once you come to a point of identifying it, you've got to figure out, what do I do? How do I process this and move forward?
Yeah.
How do I take this knowledge and use it to think more healthily, to put myself on a trajectory for success or for wholeness, or for like the ability to look in a mirror and not attack yourself for being
Right,
lazy
right.
all the time. And that, I think, is I think that is what is missing when you oversimplify things.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you can't make excuses for it.
Yep.
You really can't. Part of the weirdness of it after the fact was, oh, there was that initial like, oh, there's a reason for it. And then there was like this, I'm not going to get better. And then there was like the dip of, this is like, oh,
This is how I have
this
to
is
deal with.
this
I
is
have to deal
yeah,
with it now.
this
Yeah.
isn't going to go away.
Yeah,
There's
yeah.
no pill that takes this away. There's no like diet that takes this away. There's
Yeah.
no, environment that takes this away. But what I have learned is there are a variety of things that I need to do to help keep it in check. So that I can function as a part of a team, so that I can function as a parent and a husband,
Yeah,
that I can, as a home, like, there's certain things that I do across the board that help set me up for success. If I don't do those things, or if I don't do some of them, or can I still get things done? Yeah, I can still get things done, but it's the cumulative approach that helps me be able to just move forward. And
Yeah.
there's days where I can identify it now and go, oh, I just extended X amount of mental energy. I understand now why, even though there's this deadline that's off there a couple weeks, why is it so hard to get there and get started? And so I take that knowledge that I've learned, not just observing, and bring that back into pastoral ministry and say, yeah, I think it's naive to go, those things don't exist.
Yeah. Yeah.
They're not excuses. And I think that's the fear sometimes in an approach of that is, listen, well, if the medical industry just wants to medicate people so they can keep making money.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, capitalism, whatever, maybe. But there's also this side point that just sits back and goes, I don't know a good counselor that just assumes that, oh, a pill fixes this.
Yes. Yeah.
I don't know a good counselor. I know several counselors. I know several therapists. I don't know anybody that just sits back and just throws pills.
Yeah.
There's usually a strategy that people have a conversation with about this and this and this, and we can try this and this and this, but it's not a.
I think that's an important point for people to recognize, that medication is not a sin.
Yeah.
That it is, but it's also not a fix-all. So if medication coupled with therapy is the way it should be done, because of that, because there's not a pill that just fixes us.
It'd be nice if there was.
It'd be nice. It'd be
I'd
great.
be taller and have a tan. And maybe could grow a beard.
Maybe.
Wait, there is no.
So I think that when we talk about medication, that's a touchy subject.
Sure.
I mean, that's even become in the church. That's sometimes a
Yeah.
little touchier than even therapy. It's
Yeah.
like, well, okay, go talk to a counselor, but
Yeah.
once they just want to put you on meds, they just want to drug you,
Yeah.
and that's not the case.
Yeah.
I think you have to be discerning, just as we said, but also, if a pill could fix everything, then we would all be on something that fixed it.
What, it's interesting, I don't know if you've experienced this, but I know multiple people that will go to their regular GP, their regular doctor, because they're dealing with depression or something, and their doctor will give them an antidepressant or something, but they're like, well, I won't go to a therapist.
Yeah.
Like that, no, I don't want that. And it's a bizarre thing to me that that there's still that mindset at times of, even though there's some skepticism about therapy, well, I'll take a pill, but it's like part of a treatment. It's like going and getting an X-ray to find out that there's a broken bone, but not setting it.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah.
it's like, okay, well, there's obviously something wrong.
Yeah.
Maybe I should.
And I think that's an apropos example. I'll take it a little step further.
You always do.
To continue with the metaphor of physical health, if your leg is broken, you go somewhere, the doctor sets it, they put a cast on it, you heal up, you're still going to do physical therapy.
Yeah.
And if you skip physical therapy, then you will end up with more damage potentially down the road. You'll end up with limited use of that leg.
Yeah.
Like, all of these damaging things happen if you don't do physical therapy.
Yeah.
But from a tangible standpoint, your leg is healed. You're like, everything's good, the bone's back together, we're good to go. And I think that's, like, to me, therapy, a therapeutic relationship is the physical therapy.
Yeah.
If you're on medication, if you think that, like, if that as a team, a decision is made that medication will help, that doesn't fix it. That may help align things, but I look at medication as getting us to a baseline where we can then do physical therapy, where we can do the therapy and say, now, how do I develop healthy patterns?
Yeah.
What do healthy patterns look like? How do I engage with the life around me and in a way that brings healing and life and fullness, flourishing? Like, we love to use that word, bringing flourishing to us as human beings.
Yeah.
That's not just medication, but medication is part of it. And so how do we know when to pursue that therapeutic relationship with a counselor versus just going, I think I can manage this, I can get through it myself?
Yeah. So it's a weird thing for me. My first experience came because I hit that burnout and the mild depression after Amy had gotten sick. And I was like, okay, I need to talk to somebody because I knew I was different from how I used to be.
Yeah.
Used to bounce back real quick and just keep
Yep.
moving. And I was dealing with, like, this had been ongoing. And I remember I had talked to the doc probably 2 to 3 months before I said, okay, I think I'm willing to try and go get some counseling. I just said, hey, I'm noticing something. I'm concerned because it doesn't feel like me. And so I just want to mention it.
Yeah.
Please keep tabs on me.
Yeah.
And so when I went back for something else, because I was recovering from some shoulder issues and a surgery, I'd gone back in. They asked, how are you doing with this? And I said, you know what, I'm not doing better.
Yeah.
And there are days where I think it's worse. And so they're like, would you like to see a counselor? I was like, yeah, I think I would. And so that was the first experience of, okay, I'm obviously injured in some way, or I'm hurting in some way, enough to talk to a doctor about it.
Yep.
And so that began the process. I think coming out of that, what I have learned is I look at it from what have been the significant, like, I identified a couple of things that I wanted out of that. Like, good experience with a therapist. Okay, that was cool. I think I wanted to work with somebody that understood some of the uniqueness of pastoral ministry
Yeah.
for me.
Yeah.
So I was trying to find a different fit. And eventually I think I found one.
Yeah.
And, but a lot of that for me has been coming to a spot of just going, I've gone through major transitions. You know, the last year has been a significant transition for us as a church,
Yeah.
individually, like families. So it's like, for me, it was, there's been a lot that's gone on in life. Probably would be good to sit down with somebody that has some objectivity.
Yeah. Yeah.
That can help me make sure I'm thinking about this right. I had no intentions of, like this last round of counseling that I went through, I had no intentions of going where we did. And yet he asked really good questions at the right time. And it brought up a lot of stuff that I look at and go, wow, I need to deal with that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, I need to reframe some of these things. I need some different tools to process this part of my past or this part of my story. And so I when we started the church, one of the guys that I knew, they had a habit annually of going to see their counselor. They had a relationship with him. They would go, he and his wife would go out and spend time with their counselor just for an annual check-in. And I'm like, I'm at a spot now where I see a therapeutic relationship as a part of my spiritual formation.
Yeah.
I see
really
it as
good.
something that, it doesn't mean I'm going on a weekly basis or on a monthly basis. It may mean right now I'm checking in on a quarterly basis. You know, it may mean that.
Yeah.
But it is a part of who I am, and it's worth spending time with somebody that knows the Lord and also understands the way the brain works to be able to ask good questions and see what's going on.
Yep.
And so I think if for somebody, I'd almost go, if you feel like you need it, you probably do. You know?
Yeah.
And if you've established a relationship with a counselor, which sometimes that's the scary part, is finding a good fit.
Yeah.
Once you find somebody you feel like is a good fit, it's probably worth an annual checkup, just like you would consider going to your regular doctor.
Yep.
That's my thought on it.
Yeah, and I think that's a good way to summarize it, to bring it together. I think that there's always value in talking to people that you trust. On the front side, if you're like, we've had plenty of people over the years who have come and talked to us about where they're at spiritually, emotionally, mentally. And those, like we've already said, those are very blurry lines. We are whole people.
Yeah.
So everything affects everything else. And there have been plenty of times where someone will come and talk to us about something like a spiritual issue that they want to address. And as we continue talking, it's like, oh, I can help you here, but I can't, like, I'm not touching this because I'm not trained in that. That's above, that's beyond
That's
where
above
I'm
my scope.
comfortable. Yeah. I'm okay in the spiritual formation, helping people walk through. Sometimes, a lot of times,
patterns.
a lot of times the emotional health issues are integrated into the spiritual health, and we can like disseminate some of that. But I think that there is a time where I've often said, I think you should be talking to a counselor about this. I will stay involved and help process it. But there are deeper issues and different issues. I don't even want to say deeper. There are different issues. And I'm not a specialist in those. You know, even my GP wouldn't try to do brain surgery. You know, so I think that there's a place, but going back to when do you decide to do that, there is a time where if you're feeling something, talk to someone you trust. It doesn't mean you have to jump on the phone and try to start finding a therapist.
Right then and there,
but talk to people that you believe are wise, that will that you trust, and that will help you discern what the best path is. And so I encourage people to, whether it's a pastor or a friend or a spiritual leader that they've had in their life, that they've seen discernment, they've seen wisdom in, open up to them about this. And I encourage people who function in those roles to be to be extra discerning. I don't
Yeah,
know,
yeah.
like to really take it seriously, to
Yeah.
take seriously the damage that could come
Yeah.
if you try to do too much.
Yeah, yeah.
And recognize that there's a time and a place for me to be a spiritual guide, and there's a time and a place for me to say, you need to talk to a counselor, and
Yeah.
that would be a really healthy thing, and I'm
Yeah.
with you all the way.
Yeah, absolutely. That's part of living transparently with people.
Yeah.
Is being able to be honest about what's going on, and yeah, I agree. I think in my article in this last month's Rhythms, I talked a little bit about
you
that.
did.
You know,
Yeah.
that, you know, for some folks, a good relationship with a pastor and a trusted friend is going to be sufficient to be transparent.
Yeah.
For some folks, they're going to need those and a little something else.
Yep,
You
yep.
know?
And I hope that a pastor and a trusted friend would be able to see the difference and know
Yeah.
when to encourage the person to.
Yeah, this seems
to
more
approach
than just being sad.
Yeah,
But this
yeah.
seems more than just being angry.
Yep.
This seems more
Yeah.
than, right? Because our emotions really are those gauges to identify what's going on at a heart level.
Yeah.
I think God's given those to us for a reason. So, yeah, that's good stuff.
Well, I think that this isn't the last time we'll talk about this
Yeah, probably
because
not.
we've really we've scratched the surface of it and brought up a few different things that
Sure.
maybe we can drill down to in later episodes.
Yeah.
But it's definitely been a good conversation. I think.
absolutely.
And hopefully it's helpful
Yeah.
for you guys. It's helpful for us to kind of flesh this out and
Yeah.
figure out where we stand on it too.
Yeah. Yeah, so where are we going this week, Mike? Isaiah?
This week,
Communion?
yeah, we're going to stay in Isaiah.
Okay.
Because I think that chapter 28 it's not explicitly about communion, but I see a lot of connecting points. When God talks, it's almost like a poem or a song, because there's a lot of parallels. There's repetition in it. He refers to both Judah and Israel as being drunks,
Yeah.
which I thought was a fascinating image. It's an interesting picture that you guys are drunk, and the picture is you're staggering around. You have no idea what's going on, but you think you do.
Yeah.
There's nothing quite like someone who's drunk that thinks they're sober.
Yeah.
And that's the picture of both Judah and Israel that you get is they're staggering around and they're like, I'm fine, I can drive.
Yeah.
Give me the keys, I'll be fine. And they fall over and get
Yeah.
themselves back up. And
Yeah.
like that's the image that we're getting. And God is saying, you are going to be destroyed because just like a drunk person who gets behind the wheel of a car, you're heading into disaster. And yet there's this one portion of 28 that where God says, I will lay a cornerstone and rebuild. And that's the picture of Jesus that I really want to bring our focus into, that there is this cornerstone after all of the destruction. It's almost like God says, this will all be destroyed because you can't hold your liquor. You know, you're not able, you can't do it. You're bringing destruction upon yourself.
Yeah.
And you're just going to get picked off and destroyed. But I'm going to lay a cornerstone myself.
Yeah.
And I'm going to rebuild.
Yep.
And I feel like that's such a beautiful picture of our lives.
Yeah. Yeah.
At the risk of just using Old Testament as a metaphor. I
Yeah.
don't want to do that.
Yeah.
I don't want to do that in this message. But I think that there's a
real lesson that ties together.
that Christ called himself the cornerstone, the one that the
I'm the
builders
chief cornerstone.
rejected,
Yeah.
that has become the cornerstone.
Yeah.
And so it was in his laying down of his life that he became this cornerstone for everything else.
Yeah. Such a beautiful thought.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's interesting to make that connection. There's so many pieces in God's condemnation in chapter 24 and 25 that talk about, like when he's talking about the city of mankind, the drunkenness that's there, that like, and the effects of it, and then that once it's all removed, they're still looking for that satisfaction. They're still looking for that, and so then to pop into 28 and to see that again that these people they're intoxicated with their own thoughts and their own pursuits, that they've missed what God is saying,
Yeah.
and that God again continues to get to that point where he says, listen, we're done.
Yeah, yeah.
We're done.
Yep.
I'm going to have to start anew. And it's you're not capable of doing it.
Yeah.
I'm going to have to do it. And that in 24 through 27 is, again, it's like there's got to come a point of humility, of recognizing we can't save ourselves.
Yeah.
We've got to turn to God.
Yeah.
And so
Yep.
to tie that into communion is a really fascinating thought.
There's also later on in the chapter, there's this picture of a farmer. He says, and he talks about how a farmer gathers the wheat, and he talks about cumin a lot. That's the only place in the Bible I know he talks about cumin. But it's interesting because he's talking about farmers who they gather the product. There's several different things. So they reap this, they harvest this.
Yeah.
And but they have to prepare it. You can't just, like, wheat needs to be threshed. The grains need to be brought out.
Yeah.
And he uses the example of threshing wheat. You don't use a hammer to thresh wheat or to thresh the cumin. You use a small reed to do it. You don't roll over this with a wheel.
Yeah.
You are gentle with it. And I think that what God is saying in that, like, he starts it off with, you're drunk and staggering around and you're going to be picked off. You're going to go to destruction. But even in that, he said, I've given the farmer wisdom to know that you don't destroy something in order to get the fruit of it.
Yeah.
You have to be gentle with it.
Yeah, gentle in the process.
Yeah, and that's
fascinating.
the picture that I think that he gives, is like, I'm being gentle enough with you to I'm teasing out the good things. There's a
Yeah.
harvest here.
Yeah, that's fascinating. That's fascinating in even God's description of how he interacted with them in sending them into exile as opposed to destroying them.
Right,
Right?
yeah,
And then you think
yeah.
of Jesus and the way that Jesus lived. Like there was confrontation, but there was a gentle, lowly, like even his own, I'm gentle and lowly. There's those descriptions that Jesus has. It's a real
And taking on his yoke and learning from him.
Yeah.
Like, there's always this gentleness.
Yeah.
So I think that we can look at the destruction and talk about how harsh and judgmental and angry God is, but devoid of the history, devoid of centuries of rebellion, centuries of destruction, bringing destruction on themselves
And others.
Not caring for the poor, not caring for the weak, not taking care of the lowest in their society, brushing it all aside, taking advantage of people, like all of the danger, all the things that we look at our society and say, that's bad.
That's bad.
This is terrible. I can't believe a person or a nation or a company I can't believe they would do this.
Yeah.
We look at that and say, when will justice happen? And then we look at this description of these nations and God saying, I'm destroying them, and we say, wow, that's bad. God's being angry.
Yeah.
Well, that's judgment.
Wow.
That's justice.
Yeah.
Like, the thing that we want to see happen to people who are taking advantage and oppressing others, that's what God was doing.
Yeah.
He was bringing his justice to bear upon a people, and yet he let it go for so long in hopes that they would turn around, always saying, come back to me, come back to me. And eventually it's like, no, okay, you're done. You're destroying yourselves.
Yeah.
And I'm going to then, gently as I can, tease out this little remnant, and I'm going to then rebuild this nation with a cornerstone that I have chosen.
That's good stuff. I'm looking forward to that one.
I hope I remember all that, because that's probably...
Good thing it's recorded,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Man, that's good stuff.
All right.
I think that wraps it for today.
That does wrap it for today.
Awesome.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thanks for being here, everybody.
It's been good. It's been a good conversation. And
Yep.
as always, if you have any questions, please contact us. You can write in the comments on YouTube. You can find us on Facebook at the Grove Church in Scranton. You can find our webpage at discoverthegrove.com. Send us questions. I'd love to have some discussion here over questions that you guys might have.
Yeah.
So thanks for being here. We'll see you next week.
All right, see you.